philosophy of suicide is an incredibly controversial topic that dates all the way back to Plato. Now, Plato's public work titled Phaedo was one of the first controversial works that contributed to the controversy of suicide. Now, Plato believed that suicide was not morally acceptable and instead believed that people who commit suicide are actually cowards. Later on, we're going to discuss more in depth Plato's philosophy of suicide. Probably one of the best known and most important topics to discuss when discussing the background of the philosophy of suicide is the Christian view. One of the biggest influences that contributed to the Christian view of suicide is St. Augustine. He said that suicide is a sin. Christian philosophers such as St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas believe that life is a gift given to us by God, and that if we as humans take our lives away, then essentially we're going against God's wishes. Although there were and are many people who are against suicide, there are people who defend it as well. For example, people like Michel de Montaigne wrote essays that actually included Romans quotes that defended suicide. Perhaps one of the most important philosophers that defended suicide was John Donne. Now, throughout his work, John Donne was the first to claim that suicide was not sinful, and he shed a new perspective on suicide for people to look at. Interestingly enough, people think that suicide can be looked at as honorable. For example, there was the famous Buddhist monk who burned himself alive in protest in front of people. He killed himself, but people viewed that as an act of bravery. Another interesting point to be keen to when going over the philosophy of suicide is what the person is leaving behind. I've always thought about the families that are left behind and the emotional wreck that they feel. That's obvious. However, I never stopped to think about the financial repercussions as well. For example, if a parent commits suicide, then they're leaving behind their family to deal with the consequences of not having one of the breadwinners bringing in a stable income. We should care about the topic because it plays a huge role in everyone's life in one way or another. Everyone wants to know what the true meaning of life is, and most wonder whether it's worth living or not. Suicide rates are incredibly high throughout the entire world, and it's very common for people, even in your everyday life, to be experiencing suicidal thoughts and behavior. It's important to pay attention to that. It's important to discuss the ethical and moral permissibility of suicide as well. Furthermore, we are here to discuss other people's views on suicide, analyze our own, and we challenge you to do the same. Let's go.
He believed that the essence of life was found in one's feelings rather than rationality. It might sound odd because most of our lives we are told to look at the facts, but Hume believed that our desire are the driving force behind our actions and that our rationality becomes enslaved to our passions. Ultimately, Hume believed the emotions overpower rationality. However, to Hume, not all emotions were equal and acceptable. Feelings needed to be regulated and formed into something morally good. In Hume's essay of Suicide, he argued suicide to be morally permissible because man is governed by the general laws of matter and motion. When discussing why suicide was not a rebellion against God, Hume states, as on the one hand, the elements and other inanimate parts of our creation carry on their action without regard to the particular interest and situation of men, so men are entrusted to their own judgment and discretion in the various shocks of matter, and may employ every faculty with which they are endowed, in order to provide for the ease, happiness, and preservation. Throughout his essay, Hume emphasized the importance of nature following its course, but he also points out that occurrences cannot disturb the path of nature, that whatever happens was meant to happen. For instance, a tree falling in the forest is meant to happen, and will not divert nature from continuing its course. He argues that human life is insignificant to the course of nature. Therefore, if a man commits suicide, he is not breaking the general laws of nature because his life did not weigh heavy in the grand scheme of things. He argued that saving a life could be viewed as an alternation to natural laws, but not a sin. In the same way that saving or prolonging his life is not considered a sin, Hume argues that neither is suicide. If saving a life doesn't affect society or the course of nature, neither should self-annihilation. Plato's philosophy was based on finding individual fulfillment. He advocated for more original and logical thinking, separate to popular opinions. Plato wanted the individual to truly know themselves and what they desired. Plato did not see suicide as ethical. He believed that suicide was not permissible because it was against the will of the gods. However, he did not emphasize with those who committed suicide, acknowledging that their deaths were caused by a tremendous pain. Most people suffer from mental health illnesses, physical disabilities, and are in dire situations. To those people, Plato extends a hand of understanding and compassion. However, anything outside of that he condemns. Unlike Hume, Plato based his theories on logic rather than emotions. Plato believed that the individual, even when hopeless, had the ability to change their perspective and make a situation better.
People resort to suicide for numerous reasons: loss of faith, emotional pain that is too much to handle, and traumatic events. The list pretty much goes on. There's no certain reason. There's multiple.
Parent issues, financial issues, doubts in their head.
Okay.
Depression and people just making them feel like they're alone, like bullies.
People usually commit suicide because they feel that they have no other way out of what they're going through, whether that's financial trouble with their family, trouble in their relationship, trouble with themselves emotionally. Whatever trauma they went through has put a great scar on them and they feel like they can't get out. I think that's why people kill themselves.
They range from depression to mental health illness to a physical disability to career failure or relationship failure, and all of these things make you question yourself and the world around you, and in doing so you question your own existence, and if you don't like what you see, that can ultimately lead you to commit suicide.
I think that people resort to suicide because they feel like there's nothing else for them to do, there's nowhere else for them to go. I think that whatever is bothering them is just too heavy to deal with, and they feel like that there's nothing they can do to absolutely work through it or feel better. Stuff like anger, depression, stress, stuff like that. They feel like there's just no answer to stop it, and that it just gets worse and worse to the point where they just can't take it anymore, and they take their own life.
People resort to suicide because of many things, such as depression, bullying, or physical pain caused to the body.
They see it as an answer to their problems, or they see it as a way out, and to help, get rid of either their pain, grief, or when they lose something, dearly to them. This could either be money, a job, or they simply always have dark, negative thoughts, and they're always very pessimistic, and they always think like, oh, I'm not good enough, or something like that.
Depression, mental problems, physical problems, financial problems, like deformities in yourself, like, I don't know, Down syndrome maybe, people like that don't like themselves. Being overweight, being underweight, anorexic, anything like that. People really use anything to push themselves to the brink of suicide, that's why. And then they use their problem as the way, oh, if I commit suicide, then the problem is solved. So,
I mean, I don't really believe in reincarnation, but if I did, I think so, because I don't really think it's necessarily their fault for them killing themselves.
No. In all honesty, we don't know what happens after the afterlife, but all in all, we don't know.
Alright, but
Reincarnation could exist for those who commit suicide. Another reason for them to commit suicide is the belief of reincarnation to get a better life than what they have now.
I do think people reincarnate after committing suicide because they say that you reincarnate until you've reached nirvana. So obviously, if you committed suicide in your life, you didn't reach a state of enlightenment, you weren't your happiest, you didn't reach your state of nirvana. Therefore, I think you keep reincarnating until you get to that point.
I personally don't believe in reincarnation, but if I were to believe in reincarnation, I don't think that a soul that has committed suicide once would continue to be reincarnated just because the universe would not perpetrate agony on a soul. I think the universe would have mercy on the soul and let it be.
I think reincarnation exists, and it exists for people who commit suicide because many people commit suicide for the reason that they want to live another life and they think there's an afterlife or another better life out there for them.
I don't know. It all depends on what you believe about what happens after we die, whether it be about God, heaven and hell, or you think that God doesn't exist, or some other form of religion or belief, whatever you think it happens in the afterlife.
Reincarnation's idea is you reach peak, or like you reach nirvana or whatever, but people committing suicide is not nirvana because you're not living your life. You're not finding that success. You're not becoming true nature or whatever. You're just ending your life. So since you don't reach nirvana, you go back. It's the cycle. That's what reincarnation states. That's what should happen.
No, I feel like once you commit suicide, I think honestly you're either going to go to heaven or hell, but there's no way to really test that or no way to prove that it's true. It's just what I believe.
I think it's negative just because God punishes those who do commit suicide by sending them to hell. Reason being is because they lost the faith that he puts into them and they question the way he works.
It's not a good thing, but it's not like, I don't think he punishes people for it.
For example, I'm Catholic. Oh, my religion.
Okay.
Yeah, suicide is not an option.
Okay.
Is leaning towards the negative side for me because in his eyes, if you commit suicide, it's a sin and you automatically go to hell instead of heaven. I think that that's unfair because obviously someone who commits suicide is going through a great deal of pain, emotion, trauma, hurt in their life, and they can't deal with it.
I feel like God has a negative viewpoint on suicide just because our life was given to us. We don't have the right to take it. We just have to push through and make the best of it.
God's viewpoint, in my opinion, is negative because it's the way I was grown up and the way I was taught, or the way I saw it, because there's always a way of living or way out of pain.
I think God's viewpoint on suicide is negative because in the Bible, it says you're supposed to go to hell if you commit suicide. So,
From what I see, negative, because God thinks that suicide is a sin or not. What you shouldn't kill yourself. There's no point to kill yourself. It's terrible for you. It's tempting by the devil, so you won't go to heaven. You might go to hell. So it's definitely a negative viewpoint.
I'd say it would be negative only because in the Bible it says that if you commit suicide, you go to hell. But again, it's just your belief on what you believe is the answer to it, and what happens after we pass.
Life is worth living, to others it's not. It's a mindset that you have to have but can't force upon someone else. Everyone does have meaning though. Finding that meaning is what makes life worth living.
It's worth living even if you're going through something hard because there's always going to be people that care about you.
That makes sense.
Because you don't know what's going to happen the next day.
That things can always get better, and there's always going to be bad days, but you just need to push through and think positive and live life.
So many beautiful things in life, and there's so much to experience. And of course, there's going to be the bad things in life, but we can't focus on that. It's all about having an open mind and a good perspective to anything that comes your way.
I would say that maybe just helping others do better or just doing better for yourself. This could either be, making the world a better place, making it better for people around you, or just helping out people who are not as fortunate. Something that brings you, happiness or a sense of belonging.
Life is definitely worth living. We don't get another life. Life might be terrible for you, but will you ever get to? You don't know if you'll experience this again. I'm me right now, but what will I be after I die? It's like, you try to take in everything you can while you still can.
Life is worth living because there's just hundreds of sources of ways to get help. People to tell you that you'll get through this and that you'll recover and feel better, and that you won't be dealing with a hard time forever.
I do think that life is worth living. Everyone is giving their share of turmoils and hurt, trauma, despair, everything. Everyone is given something that is going to hurt them. And what that person decides to do with that is their decision. However, I do think that everyone can work through that. I do think that there is a clear path that you can take. I think that there is a way out.